They've served their country. Now, many are having trouble fitting back in.
Life's hard.
I was living under this Powell Bridge.
From housing to unemployment, to struggles with the psychological impact of life in a war zone. Civilian life can be a struggle for American veterans.
Once a veteran gets back, it's really hard to readjust.
This week on Straight Talk, the challenges Northwest veterans have once their tour of duty ends, and the resources at their service to honor their service. From News Channel 8, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight for Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. You know the economy's bad. Tens of thousands of people here in the Northwest are out of work, and many Americans worry we may be headed for another recession. But things are even worse for many of our veterans who've come home from Iraq and Afghanistan. According to a recent report to Congress, the unemployment rate for male veterans age 18 to 24 is 27%, 3 times the national average. The nearly 10 years we've been at war have taken a toll on Oregon vets and their families, as many have served multiple deployments. Tonight we look at the challenges facing our veterans, possible solutions, and what help is available. As we look at the happy reunions that we see on television, what don't we see as servicemen and women come home from Iraq and Afghanistan after the happy reunions? How difficult is it for them to make that transition back to civilian life? Let's begin with Don Weber.
What we see is the honeymoon period when they first get back. Everything is wonderful. Everyone missed everyone else, and they're very happy to see everyone. After a period of time, if they don't have a job, they don't have some other activities to keep them busy, they start to get a little depressed with things, and things gradually escalate to the point that generates other types of issues.
Eddie Block?
Exactly the same thing that Don just said, but also the definition of what that normal is supposed to be like when you come back is sometimes at 180 odds with how our culture is, how our jobs are. So we're trying to fit ourselves into a box that isn't written by us, that doesn't match us or our jobs, and that itself is problematic.
David Dietrichson.
I think what we see is that life moves on while the soldiers are gone over there doing their duty. They come home and people have changed. And it's not something that they're ready to adjust to yet. And, you know, families grow up, kids do things, and it's a tough adjustment to come back into a world that has changed while they've been away.
And Jelena Lago-Marcino.
I would say what you often don't see is 6 to 8 months down the road. When you were that soldier and you're coming back and you feel like you should have been adjusted by now and things aren't happening for you job-wise, maybe in your personal life, especially if you're a single soldier or you weren't employed before you deployed. You don't really feel like your roots are being put down. But if you're in the Army, you're expected to have it together. And even though there are programs out there, it takes a lot to ask for help. And that struggle that we go through to the point of not trying to figure it all out ourselves and asking is not seen.
And what about for you as a woman when you came back? Was it different?
I would say I had such a phenomenal experience over there. And coming back, the challenge was, I don't know if it's specific to being a woman, but I had taken on a lot of responsibility. I wanted to stay in the Army, but I wanted to find a civilian job as meaningful as my Army job. And that was some pretty tough sledding. And so I felt, I think, an additional amount of despair. This is the 21st century where all doors are open to women, and especially an Army sergeant female should be able to make it happen. And when it didn't happen right away, that was pretty tough. That's kind of how I remember my experience as being. It's very stressful, and it's 24/7 and constant threat. You know, you start thinking it could be any minute now, but there is a routine over there that you fall into pretty quickly, and that's very soothing. And it's it's such a contradiction to come home to almost perfect freedom. It's a little bit overwhelming, I think, at first, but that's how I remember it, just being part of a really important mission, a humanitarian mission, and at the same time being in, closest to harm's way as I would ever be.
And then the soldier comes home, and what do you hear on the crisis line from these soldiers trying to make this adjustment?
Boy, I'll tell you, what we get a lot of is they come back and they don't have that daily structure. They don't have a place to go. Oregon's very unique. They're one of 6 states in the United States that does not have an active duty military post. They come home after they've been released from Joint Base Lewis McChord, and within a couple of weeks, they're back in Hermiston or Fossil and doing their job that they were doing before they were deployed. And if they have a job, substance abuse, emotional issues, relationships, all the prime indicators of emotional crisis or other things in life, they just begin. Like Don said, about six months, you begin to see the newness of being back wear off, and they just need to ask for help. But it's so hard for them to ask for help.
One of the resources is the reintegration team. Eddie, what is your team doing? What is your mission to try to help men and women coming back from deployment?
We are, in essence, the special forces of helping veterans in this state. So you call me up with a problem, whatever your problem is, I will try to locate a resource for that, whatever it is.
What is it about the culture of the military that keeps a lot of people from asking for help?
Well, one, one of the other jobs that I do is I train infantry, but this is found throughout the military, is that we are very much a shame-based in training. And so you do something that's wrong, drop and give me 20. In front of everybody, I'll smoke you in front of everybody until you feel what is right and what is wrong. So as somebody said at the conference this morning, if you're doing well, you're good. If you do something wrong, you're bad, fix it. So we're very much part of that. So if I'm not pulling my weight, if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, then that's a shame. That's going to elicit those same feelings. So I better tighten up, better get myself back in line with everybody else. So yeah, of course, why would I want to go ask anybody for help?
One of the big challenges for vets coming home is, and you mentioned this, Jelena, is finding a job. And we don't have any specific numbers for each county, but you told me, Don, about the 41st Brigade and the unemployment rate there, which is startling.
When the 41st Brigade deployed with 3,500 people, and when they returned, 51% were unemployed or underemployed when they returned. And an interesting challenge for them, there are many employers that would like to hire veterans, but as they fill out their resumes, they use a lot of military language in the resume, and most employers are putting the resumes into a scanner and doing a keyword search. Well, military words aren't typically in their keyword search, so they get passed over for that. So our employment section helps them with their resume to make sure they convert their military experience into the types of things that might get a hit on a keyword search.
And we're looking at a job fair here you recently held at the convention center. Tell me more about that. Were you able to get vets jobs through that?
David, didn't you attend that
Yeah, there
job
was
center?
quite a few employers from the metro area that were there, quite a few homeless vets and veterans that came prepared. I think that's one of the things that we forget about is a lot of times the vets come back and they don't know how to sell themselves. They don't know how to sell the skill sets that they have to employers that are looking for jobs. I think it was a fairly good success. There were quite a few employers that were there. I think quite a few employers had jobs that would fill and veterans could identify with.
There are a number of events still coming up that I want to tell people about if they'd like to take advantage of some of your stand downs and job fairs coming up. There's one actually on Monday in Vancouver. You told me in Washington County they have something like 4,000 homeless vets?
That's the last estimates that I've heard. They do a lot of homeless counts for total homeless count, and they make some assumptions that a majority of those people are veterans. But it's significant, people that are living out in the homeless camps and out in the very remote areas, yes.
A lot of our vets are dealing with something that a lot of people have heard of, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's something that you deal with, Eddie. You give presentations on that. Is there a stigma attached to that? Are there any myths that people...
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
There's a lot of stigma about PTSD and the whole 9 yards. One of my personal problems with the diagnosis of PTSD is that it's written by people who don't understand military culture, because half the symptoms there are things that I try very hard to train into my soldiers. Hypervigilance, startle response, the whole 9 yards. I want you to have this. You won't be successful downrange unless you have half of these traits already. And if without even having PTSD, just by looking at your reactions as a soldier, being a good soldier, you're already halfway there. So I have a problem with the way it's delivered for us. And the stigma of PTSD is in our world means one of weakness. And so individuals are having these issues and they say, oh my gosh, I have PTSD. What does that mean? That means I'm going to end up at such and such. So I'm not going to talk about it. Again, the shame-based culture. So I'm going to lock it up. I'm going to try harder. And that's social isolation is one of the worst things you can do if you do have any issues.
I think one of the most important things to remember is that PTSD is a normal reaction to an abnormal set of circumstances, and there's nothing normal about being hypervigilant 24 hours a day, but it is treatable.
Jelena, what about from a woman's perspective?
I would say PTSD, I've been around enough soldiers and led enough soldiers, enough male soldiers to understand there is some shame and stigma about having PTSD. And then if you're a female, sometimes you have to have a lot of trust to be able to look at a hardcore infantry soldier, infantry leader, and say, I don't seem to want to leave my apartment, I don't seem to have any motivation, having bad dreams, I think I might be having problems. As a woman, and I'm not speaking for all women, but I would say it was my experience, it's just very hard to fulfill a negative stereotype that isn't completely prevalent in the Army, but it's still there, of course. Couldn't handle it. You want to be, especially if you asked to go and volunteered to be part of the fight. You don't want to come back if you felt you could handle it. Coming back and saying, I can't handle this. This is starting to get to be a little bit too much. It takes a tremendous amount of trust in your unit to be able to get some help or to reach out to the resources. And then it just takes a certain amount of reconciling your pride and your expectations in yourself and saying, this is a head injury of a different kind.
Yeah. We need to take a break right now, but as we go to a break, I want to bring up that phone number again because there are resources available, so do ask for help. Again, that number that's a 24-hour line is 1-888-688-2264, and the suicide prevention number 1-800-273-TALK. We've been talking about vets, but what about, Don, what about families that they struggle during the deployment and when their vet comes home?
I think the family members have a much more difficult time with the deployments than the service member does. The service member has a very structured, defined environment. They're told what they have to do every day, what the mission is. The people at home have to deal with all of the unexpected things and the whole variety of things that families have to deal with. Service member returns and now they have to reintegrate into how to take care of the children and how all of those things interact with each other. And that's a very difficult transition to make.
And sometimes because it's difficult, there is a problem with domestic abuse, and Eddie, you were telling me that's underreported.
Yeah, it's extremely underreported. One report that I saw said that the active duty Army suspected that they report less than 4% of the cases actually occurring in the active duty status. What we learn in downrange is to emotionally regulate ourselves, to feel nothing whatsoever, but to respond with anger to various things. We come back to an area, we don't have these feelings anymore. We're in a situation that people wish it could be the way it was before, but it can't be that way anymore. We've changed as people, for better or worse. And the majority of the domestic abuse that you find in the military are not your typical male or batterers of abuse and control. It is out of control, emotional regulation, battle mind training put in the wrong situation. The skills that we learn over there, we're trying to apply here, and it's just not working. And you want to talk about guilt. The individuals that perpetuate this are filled with guilt. And so why should I get your help because I did this terrible thing?
And that's something that you're working with vets on?
Yes. There's a program in Oregon City called the Cadre Program that we work with combat veteran for domestic violence.
And Jelena, you were telling me about something particular to your situation.
I would say, I'm on the deployment. I see my soldiers and they see me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And on active duty, it's still similar. You get home, but you're on the base. You see them around. You see them every day. There's barracks. There's housing. Here in the Guard, and I'm so relieved that the Guard is paying such attention to reintegration because I see my soldiers now 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. And so I'm watching soldiers in crisis, but I'm watching it happen in slow motion. And it's so fantastic that I can reach out to reintegration or to my chain of command 24/7 and get them help.
And you also have, David, the Crisis Center. Tell me more about what's available. It's not just a suicide hotline.
It's not just a suicide line.
And Eddie, about 20 seconds. Did you have something you want to add before we have to go?
The stigma, I talk to people all the time about the PTSD, and when I talk to them, they're like, really? I'm not the only one that feels this? Even though we are bombarded with information about PTSD, they still think that this is the only thing out there. You're not the only one. I've done it. I lived in my truck for a month. I went to therapy for 2 years. There's a million of us out there just like you. There's help available.